Hello guys and welcome back. Today we will take a closer look at these two crew figures for my Jagdpanther and paint them. I will attempt to paint them in the P.Camo pattern. These figures are from MiniArt and are the special edition. That means it includes resin heads. They look a lot more detailed than their plastic counterparts, so I will be using them of course. But first I need to fill a few gaps. For that I am using surface putty from Camo. It's a very thin putty, almost like a paint, that flows right into the gaps. It has a very low surface tension and behaves like an enamel wash. But because it's so thin, you might need a few layers to fill the deeper gaps. I debated whether to leave the heads separate or attach them to the bodies now. I decided to join everything together because I didn't want to use any more glue after the figures were painted. I used super glue for that. And this is what the two figures look like assembled. Using an inexpensive black primer from a spray can, I can quickly check whether all the gaps are filled or if I still need to touch up anything. And after all these spots have been fixed, it's time for the real airbrushing. First I'll paint it black again, so I can reach all the small corners this time. For this I use my usual black primer from Vallejo. Next I use white for a zenithal highlight. I spray the paint downwards onto the figures. This makes all the areas exposed to the sun brighter and the shadows remain black. I'm unsure how important a zenithal highlight is for this type of camouflage pattern, as I don't think it had any real effect in the end, but it can't hurt. I will paint the uniform in the Erbsenmuster or P.Camo in English. To ensure an even base, I also sprayed the first color with my airbrush. I tried to apply the paint so thinly to allow the zenithal highlight to show through. However, it wasn't entirely satisfied with the result, so I decided to apply the paint with a bit more coverage. And this is what the figures look now. The highlights aren't really visible anymore, but I think it was the right decision to make the base color uniform. In this video I mainly want to focus on painting the uniforms, so I will keep the face painting brief. First I apply Vallejo's brown sand in thin layers to face and hands. The shade is quite dark on its own, but it will be lightened later. 2 to 3 passes are sufficient for a solid coverage. A very thin red wash is now used to darken the shadows even further and emphasize them more strongly. Once this is dry, I will use lighter colors to highlight areas such as the nose, forehead or cheeks. But what you see here went completely wrong and looked awful. In the end I had to completely rebase the face with brown sand and start over, but this time without the camera. The second attempt looked a bit better, but I will link the tutorial I used in the description. Therefore let's take another look at the uniform. First, medium-sized patches in this lighter sand brown tone will be added to the brown base color. Unfortunately, the paint from MIG has a really poor coverage. In some places I needed 4 to 5 coats to get a somewhat uniform color. Next time I will use the corresponding 3rd gen color from AK Interactive for these spots, hoping it has better coverage. I distribute these spots evenly all over the uniform. A reference image is highly recommended for this to ensure the correct ratio between the two colors. And this is what both figures look like with the light spots. Next I need this dark green. I'm now painting smaller, irregular spots between the previous ones. And thankfully this paint has a good coverage again. The shape of these spots should be somewhat more regular and jagged compared to the more rounded light brown ones. So far I've been using a size 2 brush for everything. After the medium-sized spots, we will stick with the dark green. Now I will paint small dots everywhere except for the dark green spots. The individual dots should not be too close together, as we will need to paint many more dots in other colors later. Here too, a good reference is useful to get a feel for the number of dots. Once the dark green dots are finished, I will go back to the light brown tone from before. The dots continue, only this time in the light brown color. Same principle as before, everywhere except the already painted light brown areas. The pattern is starting to get quite confusing, and I need to concentrate on actually painting all the new dots and not forgetting any spots. Then I need our first base color again, this time for the dark green and light brown spots. Our uniform now features all three colors, represented by large patches and small dots. However, the overall look is still rather simple. Therefore, we will add some color using light green. This color instantly elevates the pattern to a whole new level. These dots can now be painted anywhere, on the base color, on the large areas, on the smaller ones, and even in contact with the other small dots is not a problem. The colors I've used so far all come from the same set by Camo by Mick. Therefore I didn't have to spend time searching for exact colors on my other shelves. According to the Camo by Mick painting instructions, the pattern would be finished now. However, the box art from MiniArt also has medium green spots. I'm no expert when it comes to uniforms, but I think I will need those medium green spots too. Since this color is not included, I simply mix it myself from the dark and light green. I'm now squeezing these dots in wherever there's still some space. The uniform is essentially finished now, at least as far as the colors are concerned. However, there are still a few details that will, of course, need to be painted. I paint the belts in a very dark grey. The front side is particularly tricky to reach, an angled brush can be helpful here. I also paint the rim of the commander's hat dark grey. And this light greenish grey tone was a very good match for the fabric part. The commander also wears a shirt under his uniform, which I also paint greenish grey. Normally, painting the boots of tank crews wouldn't be so important if you wanted to save some time. But the gunner's boots are visible in his pose and therefore need to be painted accordingly. The figures also have a few raised details, such as the belt buckle and the badges on their chests. For this, I thought the AK markers might be quite suitable again. And this is what our two figures look like now, after all the details have been painted. But we are not finished yet. After I protected both figures with a clear varnish, I will modify them with a filter first. We usually use filters on vehicles to unify different colors or to slightly correct the overall color. Of course, this also works on figures, just on a much smaller scale. It's very important to me that this filter doesn't act like a wash. That means it shouldn't accumulate around details or in recesses, but instead cover the entire uniform surface with a thin brown layer. This unifies the different colors, of which we have quite a few. Then the uniform looks more like a single cohesive piece of clothing and less like a pile of colorful patches. And in addition, the uniform naturally has a somewhat worn appearance now. To thin the filter, I use white spirit. Depending on the desired look, I apply several coats, allowing them to dry completely between each coat. But very importantly, this filter is exclusively for uniform application. On the face, such a filter could, in the worst case, completely ruin all shading and highlighting. So apply it precisely. After the filter comes a proper wash. I particularly want to emphasize the folded collar, which is why I opted for a dark green wash. This gives me a strong contrast. I apply the wash quite heavily in the areas where I want to emphasize details and edges. It looks rather odd right now, but with a little white spirit I can manipulate the wash and apply it accordingly around all the details. I spread it very thinly over the remaining areas where it naturally collects in the folds. I also applied several layers of this in some places until I achieved the desired contrast. And this is what they look like after the wash has completely dried. Tanks driving across rough terrain collect dirt and dust. And the same of course applies to the crew when they leave the vehicle. Since the Jagdpanther isn't dirty yet, I'm keeping the effects rather simple for now. But a nice dust wash from AK never hurts. I'm applying it all over the boots and the lower part of the leg. Using some white spirit, I can now create very smooth gradients and thus achieve a flowing transition between clean and dirty uniform. Further down the shoe, I can intensify the dirt again by adding several layers. The commander would normally be holding headphones in his hands, but the one from the kit would need to be scratch built and all my attempts looked pretty bad. That's why I thought, why don't I just give him a Walther P38 pistol that I had previously printed. It's easier to leave such small parts attached to the supports while I paint them. Still, don't press too hard or the gun will fly off. This dark grey is a good base for metal. Then I highlight the edges with a pencil. Just be careful to not accidentally knock it. After knocking it off, I will attempt to use the pencil again with the help of some tweezers. Then I stick the gun in the open hand with ultra glue. I could have used super glue, but I didn't want to risk damaging the paint job. In my Jagdpanther video, I made these blankets for the two soldiers to sit on. Since I want to attach them to the tank, I need to quickly prime them with a brown base coat first. All the other effects to make them look more realistic will follow later. Now I'm gluing the two blankets into the hatches. Due to the negative imprint on the underside, there's only one way they can fit. And then the figures fit perfectly into their correct positions. Of course, I won't glue them down yet, since I still have to weather the entire Jagdpanther first. That completes the crew for the Jagdpanther. For my first P-dot camouflage pattern, it turned out quite well. but there's still plenty of room for improvement, especially regarding the depth and detail. But you have to start somewhere, and hopefully the more figures I make, the better they will become. But what do you think? If you have any tips or improvements, feel free to let me know in the comments. In one of my next videos, we will take care of the weathering for the Jagdpanther. If you don't want to miss that, you should subscribe to my channel to never miss any future uploads. Thank you all for watching, and see you next time.